The German army had never been stopped like this before. For months it had crushed everything in its path. Poland fell, France collapsed. Entire armies surrendered in shock. Europe believed Hitler was unstoppable. But in the freezing winter of 1941, just miles from Moscow, that unstoppable force began to break. Engines froze, soldiers collapsed in the snow, supplies ran out. And for the first time in World War II, Germany faced something it had not prepared for: total resistance. The Battle of Moscow would become Germany's first major collapse, and it changed the course of the war forever. If you enjoy powerful, clear, and cinematic history storytelling, take a second to like this video and subscribe to History Plus. It helps the channel grow and allows us to bring you deeper World War II stories every week. Now let's go back to the summer of 1941, when everything seemed to be going Germany's way. In June 1941, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. Over 3 million German and Axis soldiers crossed into the Soviet Union. Thousands of tanks rolled forward. Aircraft dominated the skies. The plan was simple but ambitious: destroy the Soviet Union quickly, capture Moscow, and end the war in the East before winter. At first, it looked like another lightning victory. German forces moved rapidly through Soviet territory. Entire Red Army divisions were surrounded and captured. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were taken prisoner. Cities fell one after another. The speed of the advance shocked the world. German commanders believed the Soviet Union was collapsing. Many soldiers were told they would return home by Christmas. Winter uniforms were not fully prepared because leaders assumed the campaign would be over before severe cold arrived. Confidence was high, too high, but the Soviet Union was not a small European country. It was massive. Distances were enormous. As German forces advanced deeper, their supply lines stretched thin. Fuel had to travel hundreds of miles. Spare parts became harder to deliver. Trucks broke down on rough roads. The further they moved, the harder it became to support the front lines. Still, the German army pushed toward its biggest target: Moscow. Moscow was more than just a city. It was the political and symbolic heart of the Soviet Union. If Moscow fell, many believed the entire Soviet system would collapse. Hitler understood this. Capturing Moscow would not only be a military victory but a psychological one. In October 1941, Germany launched Operation Typhoon, a massive offensive aimed directly at Moscow. At first, the results seemed promising. Soviet defenses were hit hard. Panic spread in the capital. Some government offices prepared to evacuate. Civilians dug trenches and built defensive lines around the city. But something slowed the German advance. Autumn rains turned the landscape into thick mud in a season known as Rasputitsa. Tanks sank into the ground. Trucks became stuck. Horses struggled to pull supply wagons. The famous Blitzkrieg, built on speed and movement, began losing momentum. When the ground finally froze, German forces expected to regain speed. Instead, they faced something worse: extreme winter. By late November and early December 1941, temperatures dropped far below freezing. In some areas, temperatures reached -30 or even -40 degrees Fahrenheit. German equipment was not built for these conditions. Engine oil froze, batteries failed, weapons jammed, soldiers suffered terribly. Many still wore uniforms meant for autumn, not deep winter. Frostbite cases increased rapidly. Fingers and toes turned black. Medical teams were overwhelmed. Fires barely provided warmth against the brutal wind. Some soldiers woke up to find their boots frozen solid. Meanwhile, the Red Army was preparing for its moment. Despite enormous losses earlier in the invasion, the Soviet Union had not surrendered. Factories had been moved east beyond the Ural Mountains, far from German bombers. Production of tanks and weapons continued. Fresh troops were trained. Most importantly, Siberian divisions were transferred west after Soviet intelligence confirmed Japan would not attack in the east. These Siberian troops were experienced in extreme cold. They had proper winter clothing. They moved on skis. They understood how to fight in snow and ice. As German forces approached the outskirts of Moscow, exhausted and freezing, the Red Army prepared to strike back. On December 5th and 6th, 1941, the Soviet counteroffensive began. Artillery thundered across the frozen front. Fresh Soviet divisions attacked along a wide line. German units, already weakened by cold and supply shortages, were suddenly under heavy pressure. Ski troops appeared in forests and struck supply routes. Tanks adapted for winter conditions pushed forward. The shock was enormous. For months, Germany had advanced. Now, for the first time, it was being pushed back. The offensive toward Moscow had failed. German units began retreating in several sectors. It was not yet a total collapse, but the momentum had clearly shifted. Hitler reacted with anger. He ordered his troops to stand fast. No retreat. He believed holding ground would stabilize the front. Some generals disagreed. They warned that without flexibility, the situation could become worse. But Hitler's orders were final, and so German soldiers remained in exposed positions under constant attack and brutal cold. The Battle of Moscow was no longer about capturing a city. It had become a fight for survival. For the first time in World War II, Germany's war machine was not advancing, it was struggling. The myth of invincibility had cracked, and this was only the beginning of Germany's first major collapse. In the next part, we will go deeper into the counteroffensive, the leadership crisis inside German command, and how this winter battle reshaped the entire Eastern Front. As the Soviet counteroffensive gained strength, German commanders began to realize the situation was more serious than they had expected. This was not just a temporary setback caused by bad weather. The Red Army was attacking with coordination, fresh troops, and growing confidence. German units that had once moved forward with speed were now fighting defensive battles in freezing conditions. The cold continued to destroy equipment. Tanks had to be started with open flames under their engines. Rifles had to be kept close to the body so the metal would not freeze. Wounded soldiers sometimes froze before help could reach them. In some units, frostbite casualties were higher than combat losses. Supply trucks struggled to move across icy roads, and ammunition deliveries slowed. Meanwhile, Soviet forces pressed harder. Siberian divisions, trained for winter warfare, used white camouflage to blend into the snow. They attacked flanks and weak positions. German soldiers reported sudden assaults from forests and frozen fields. The shock was psychological as much as physical. For the first time, many German troops felt they were no longer in control. Inside German headquarters, tension grew. Some generals recommended tactical withdrawals to shorter, stronger defensive lines. They believed saving the army was more important than holding every inch of ground. But Hitler refused. He feared that retreat would cause panic and destroy morale. His no-retreat order forced units to hold exposed positions. Some divisions managed to stabilize their lines through discipline and defensive skill. Others suffered heavy losses. The winter battlefield became a test of endurance rather than speed. By the end of December 1941, German forces had been pushed back between 60 and 150 miles in some sectors. Moscow had been saved. The capital did not fall. The offensive that was meant to end the Soviet Union had failed. This was Germany's first major strategic collapse of the war. Not a complete destruction, but a clear failure of its grand plan. In Part 3, we will explore how this defeat changed Hitler's leadership style, how command conflicts deepened, and why the Battle of Moscow reshaped the future of World War II. Stay with History Plus. The consequences of this collapse are only beginning to unfold. After the failure outside Moscow, Hitler's confidence took a serious hit. For years, his bold risks had brought victory. Now, for the first time, his strategy had clearly failed. Instead of adjusting calmly, he reacted by tightening his control over the army. Several senior generals who suggested tactical retreats were removed from command. Hitler began taking more direct control of military decisions. Orders were issued from far away, often ignoring the real conditions on the frozen front lines. This shift reduced flexibility, and flexibility had once been one of Germany's greatest strengths. German officers became cautious about disagreeing. Some followed orders they believed were risky simply because they had no choice. The chain of command grew more rigid at a time when adaptability was critical. On the Soviet side, leadership evolved in a different way. Stalin had made mistakes earlier in the invasion, but after the defense of Moscow, he began trusting experienced commanders more. Coordination improved, logistics became stronger. The Red Army learned from its early losses. The winter of 1941-42 did not end the war, but it ended the illusion of a quick German victory. Germany would launch new offensives in 1942, especially toward the south, but the momentum of early 1941 was gone. The Battle of Moscow proved something powerful. Germany could be stopped. And once an army loses its image of invincibility, the psychological damage spreads far beyond the battlefield. In the final part, we will look at why historians still call this battle Germany's first major collapse, and how it shaped the brutal years that followed. Stay with History Plus. The final chapter is coming. When the snow began to melt in early 1942, the battlefield outside Moscow looked quiet, but the silence hid a major truth. Germany had failed in its main objective. Moscow was still standing. The Soviet Union had not collapsed, and the idea of a fast victory in the East was finished. The Battle of Moscow was not the end of Germany's army. It was still strong, still dangerous. But it was the first time Hitler's war machine had been pushed back on such a large scale. The myth of unstoppable blitzkrieg was broken. From this point forward, the war on the Eastern Front became a long and brutal struggle of endurance. Germany would try again in 1942, launching new offensives toward the south. But the balance had shifted. Soviet industry was growing stronger. American aid was increasing. The Red Army had learned hard lessons and proved it could fight back. Historians often call the Battle of Moscow Germany's first major collapse because it changed the direction of the war. It showed the world that Nazi Germany could be stopped, and once that illusion shattered, everything that followed became harder for Hitler. If you found this story clear and powerful, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Germany could have won if Moscow had fallen? I'd really like to hear your opinion. And if you enjoy deep World War II storytelling, share this video and make sure you're subscribed to History Plus for the next episode. The snow outside Moscow didn't just freeze soldiers, it froze an empire's ambition. I'll see you in the next one.